Ma'am, what are you doing out here this late? Let me see some ID.
I'm loading my groceries. I'm a federal judge. Here's my credentials.
Yeah, well, go ahead and hand me your driver's license.
Officer, you've already seen my federal identification. I am not required to provide anything further unless I'm suspected of a crime.
I'll tell you when you're required. Step back.
Oh, what's he doing?
Officer, release my...
She didn't break the law. She didn't resist. She didn't raise her voice. She paid $86.47 for groceries. And by the end of the night, a city was facing a $6.8 million lawsuit. The evening started like dozens of others before it. The supermarket parking lot was active but calm. Cars pulling in and out, people walking between rows with bags in their hands, shopping carts clattering over uneven pavement. Judge Elena Carter parked in a space several rows from the entrance, shut off the engine, and stepped out of the car without looking around. There was nothing to look for. Inside the store, the environment was predictable. Fluorescent lighting, shelves stocked with the same brands she always bought, the low background noise of music mixed with conversation. She moved quickly through the aisles, selecting milk, eggs, bread, and produce. She added one extra item she had forgotten to write down, then headed to checkout. At the register, she paid $86.47. The receipt printed. She folded it once and placed it in her pocket. There was no conversation beyond a brief acknowledgement. She picked up the bags and exited the store. Outside, the light had shifted. The sun was lower now, not gone, but close enough to cast long shadows across the lot. She walked back toward her car, unlocked the trunk, and began loading the groceries one bag at a time. As she placed the second bag inside, a patrol vehicle entered the parking lot behind her car. The vehicle did not activate its lights. There was no siren. It rolled forward slowly and stopped behind her, angled slightly toward the rear of her car, close enough to be deliberate, far enough to avoid contact. An officer stepped out of the patrol vehicle. He did not pause. He did not scan the area. He walked directly toward her. The first thing he said was a command. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." No explanation followed. No reason was given. Judge Carter turned slightly, keeping her hands visible. She did not step away. She asked a question instead. "Am I being detained?" There was no response. The officer moved closer. The distance between them shortened quickly, close enough that his body cam frame filled with the side of her car and her shoulder. She spoke again calmly. "I am a federal judge." There was no radio call, no verification attempt, no request for identification, and she repeated it. "I am a federal judge." The officer did not step back. He did not slow down. He reached toward her arm. The grocery bag slipped from her hands. Milk struck the pavement and burst open. Eggs shattered instantly. Bread rolled across the asphalt, stopping against a tire several feet away. Two people nearby stopped walking. One turned around fully. Another raised a phone. The officer placed Judge Carter in handcuffs. Metal clicked shut. "You are violating my rights," she said clearly, without raising her voice. The officer did not respond. Within minutes, more people noticed. A small crowd formed near the adjacent row of cars. Someone called 911 reporting police conduct in the parking lot. A second patrol vehicle arrived shortly after. The second officer approached, listened briefly, and asked for Judge Carter's name. When she said it, his posture changed immediately. He turned toward the first officer, said something out of frame, and the handcuffs were removed. No apology was offered. No explanation followed. She was told, "We'll handle this." Both officers returned to their vehicles and left the lot. Nothing was documented that night. There was no incident report. No use of force form. No supervisor notification. No internal record acknowledging the detention. Judge Carter returned home and documented the incident in writing. She recorded the sequence of events, the statements made, the physical positioning, and the presence of witnesses. She preserved the grocery receipt. Within a day, formal preservation notices were sent to the city requesting all related materials, including body cam footage, radio traffic, patrol vehicle data, and store security video. The notices included sanctions for noncompliance. Several days later, evidence that was initially described as unavailable was produced. The body cam footage showed the officer issuing commands without stating cause. It showed Judge Carter identifying herself before being restrained. It showed no attempt at verification before the use of force. Store security footage showed the patrol vehicle entering the lot without lights or sirens and stopping behind her car. It showed bystanders stopping and filming. Radio audio confirmed the officer acknowledged Judge Carter's identity before the handcuffs were applied. A federal civil rights lawsuit was filed weeks later. The amount requested was $7 million. The complaint alleged unlawful detention, excessive force, and violation of constitutional rights, citing both federal law and department policy. Depositions followed. The primary officer testified over multiple sessions. His account changed repeatedly. Statements conflicted with body cam footage, timelines shifted, justifications introduced later were not present in the original footage. Expert witnesses reviewed the evidence. Use of force specialists testified that no escalation criteria were met. Civil rights attorneys testified that the detention lacked lawful basis. Former law enforcement supervisors testified that policy required verification before restraint under the circumstances shown. When the case proceeded to trial, the jury was shown the raw footage. No narration was added, no edits were made. The sequence was presented exactly as recorded. The grocery bags hitting the pavement were shown in real time. If the handcuffs closing were audible, the jury deliberated for several hours. The verdict was unanimous. The city was found liable. Damages were awarded in the amount of $6.8 million, in addition to attorney's fees and mandatory policy changes. The city issued a written statement following the verdict. No admission of wrongdoing was included. Payment was issued. Several months later, the officer resigned from the department. No criminal charges were filed. That is the sequence of events so far, and the case moved steadily toward trial. Pre-trial motions were filed and argued. Requests to exclude portions of the footage were denied. The court ruled that the recordings would be shown in full without narration or editorial framing. The sequence would be presented exactly as it occurred. Jury selection took place over several days. Prospective jurors were questioned about prior experiences with law enforcement, familiarity with civil rights cases, and their ability to evaluate video evidence objectively. A panel was selected and sworn in, and when the trial began, the courtroom was full. Attorneys organized exhibits. Screens were positioned so every juror could clearly see the footage. Court staff tested audio levels. No opening statement referenced conclusions. The emphasis was placed on chronology. The jury was shown the first video. It began with the patrol car entering the parking lot. No lights, no siren. The vehicle rolling forward and stopping behind Judge Carter's car. The officer exiting and approaching without hesitation. They heard the command, "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." They watched Judge Carter turn slightly, hands visible, standing between the open trunk and her car. They heard the question, "Am I being detained?" They heard nothing in response. The video continued, the officer moving closer, the frame tightening, the camera angle shifting as proximity increased. They heard Judge Carter identify herself. "I am a federal judge." They saw no radio call, no pause, no change in behavior. They heard her say it again. "I am a federal judge." They watched the officer reach out. They saw the grocery bags fall, milk bursting open, liquid spreading across the pavement, eggs breaking, bread rolling away. They heard the sound of handcuffs closing, metal clicking shut. They heard Judge Carter say, "You are violating my rights." They saw the crowd begin to form, phones raised, people stopping. They watched the second patrol car arrive. They heard the second officer ask for her name. They watched the change in posture, the handcuffs coming off. They saw both officers leave, and the footage ended. The jury then reviewed store security video, the same sequence from a distance, the patrol car entering without lights, the placement behind Judge Carter's vehicle, the moment people stopped walking. Radio audio was played next. Jurors listened as the officer acknowledged Judge Carter's identity prior to restraint. The timestamps aligned with the body cam footage. There was no report written that night. That fact was confirmed through department records. Supervisors testified. They explained reporting requirements. They confirmed that detentions involving handcuffs required documentation. They confirmed that no such documentation existed. Use of force experts testified. They explained escalation standards. They identified multiple points where the encounter should have stopped. They stated that identity verification should have occurred before physical contact. Civil rights experts testified. They explained constitutional protections against unlawful detention. They described how failure to articulate reasonable suspicion invalidated the encounter. The defense questioned witnesses but did not dispute the recordings. Their focus remained on interpretation rather than sequence. After closing arguments, the jury was instructed on the law. They were told to consider the evidence as presented. They were told to deliberate without bias or speculation. The jury left the courtroom. Deliberations lasted several hours. When the jury returned, the courtroom stood. The verdict was read. Liability was found on all major claims. Damages were awarded in the amount of $6.8 million. Attorneys' fees were ordered separately. Mandatory policy changes were imposed. Training reforms were required. The judgment was entered into the record. The city issued a written statement later that day. The language was careful. No admission of wrongdoing was included. Payment procedures were initiated. No appeal was filed. Within days, the city's legal department began coordinating compliance. Internal emails circulated referencing the judgment amount. Budget officers were notified. Finance departments adjusted allocations. The police department initiated an internal administrative review. The scope focused on policy adherence, documentation failures, and supervisory oversight. The officer involved was placed on administrative leave with pay. Public records requests increased. Media outlets requested footage. Civil rights organizations requested copies. Portions of the Bodycam video were released with redactions. Store security footage was released separately. Several weeks later, revised directives were issued within the department. Verification procedures were clarified. Language regarding proximity and physical contact was updated. Documentation requirements were expanded. Mandatory training sessions were scheduled. Attendance was required for patrol officers. The case was referenced by file number only. Before the administrative review concluded, the officer submitted his resignation. The resignation was accepted. No disciplinary findings were issued publicly. The review was closed. Judge Carter returned to the bench. She resumed her docket without interruption. No public comments were made beyond what was already on the record. The court issued compliance deadlines, policy updates were monitored, training reforms were reviewed by an external consultant. Several months later, the city filed confirmation of payment. The amount matched the judgment. Attorneys' fees were paid separately. No appeal followed. The case began appearing in filings in other jurisdictions. Attorneys cited the detention sequence. Portions of the footage were referenced in unrelated civil rights motions. Within the department, reporting thresholds were lowered. Supervisory notification requirements were expanded. Body camera activation rules were updated. The supermarket parking lot remained unchanged. Cars parked. People shopped. Groceries were loaded into trunks. The sequence continued to exist in records, recordings, and filings. Months passed after the payment was confirmed. The court's compliance schedule moved forward quietly. Progress reports were submitted on time. Policy revisions were reviewed and approved. Training completion rates were documented. External monitors filed summaries confirming adherence to the court's orders. Within the police department, the changes became procedural. Supervisors were required to log all detentions, regardless of duration or outcome. Officers were instructed to articulate reasonable suspicion verbally before issuing commands. Verification protocols were added to training modules and roll call briefings. Body camera policies were updated to require activation earlier in all citizen encounters. Failure to activate cameras triggered automatic review. Documentation templates were rewritten to close gaps identified during the trial. None of these changes were announced publicly with reference to the case. They appeared instead as routine updates circulated internally through bulletins and memoranda. The officer who resigned did not return to the department. His resignation was recorded as voluntary. No criminal charges were filed. No additional public statements were issued. Judge Carter continued presiding over cases. Her courtroom schedule remained full. Motions were heard, rulings were issued, appeals proceeded as normal. The case did not alter her judicial responsibilities or authority. Legal scholars referenced the ruling in articles and training materials. The emphasis remained on the sequence of actions and the absence of verification. The case was cited alongside other civil rights decisions involving recorded encounters. Attorneys in unrelated jurisdictions included excerpts from the footage in motions arguing unlawful detention. Judges referenced the case when addressing evidentiary standards involving body camera recordings. The grocery store continued operating as usual. Customers parked, shopped, and left without incident. No signage marked the location. No acknowledgement of the event appeared on site. The parking lot remained unchanged. Cars filled the same rows. People crossed between vehicles. Groceries were loaded into trunks. The record remained intact. Court filings, video recordings, audio timestamps, depositions, verdicts, from a purchase totaling $86.47 to a judgment of $6.8 million that the sequence stood complete. No commentary was added, no interpretation was required, actions were recorded, decisions were reviewed, consequences followed. If you want more real cases, real footage, and real timelines, subscribe to the channel. Because when everything is recorded, the truth always comes out.